Hello, and we're going to continue with the central nervous system, and we're going to talk about the spinal cord. So what is the spinal cord? It's in the central nervous system, and it's tissue that's enclosed inside this vertebral column, inside the vertebra, the backbone. And it runs from below the foramen magnum into about level L1 of the vertebra. Okay, that's the spinal cord. It allows you to have two-way communication to and from the brain. It's protected. It's got a bony cage, the vertebra. It's got meninges, just like the brain does, and cerebral spinal fluid. There's also an epidural space that's on top of the dura. It's between the dura and the bony vertebra. So if you have an epidural, this is where they're going to inject a needle and put in medicine in the epidural space. And your spinal cord has your reflex centers, so things that are automatic that don't require the brain. So when we look at the spinal cord, we're going to talk about the spinal nerves later. The spinal nerves are these things that are coming off of the spinal cord. This is the actual spinal cord, and it starts just below the foramen magnum, goes all the way down to L1. And then it continues, but it's not called the cord anymore. It goes and it makes this little flared area called the cauda equina, which is the horse's tail. So you don't have a cord per se after L1. So below L1, the spinal cord kind of flares out and becomes this thing called the cauda equina. And this is important when I talked about that epidural space. When you get an epidural, or if you want to get a spinal tap, they're going to take fluid from your spinal column to get CSF. They want to do the lumbar puncture. That's what they call a lumbar puncture or an epidural. They'll do it below the L1 so that when they take the needle and they go through the skin, and there's always that chance they'll puncture the dura, they'll puncture in and go into the spinal cord because it's a tight space. And so if they do it below L1, if the needle punctures through and they're going to inject the medicine or take the CSF, these nerves will kind of float away. You won't cause any damage. Whereas if you injected the needle here and you punched through and punched into the spinal cord, you could cause some damage to the spinal cord. So a lumbar puncture or epidural is usually done below L1, usually L2, L3, L4, so that you lessen the chance that you're going to cause any damage to the spinal cord. And so I just wanted to mention that. And I also wanted to mention something called a spinal headache. If they do this lumbar puncture, when they puncture, sometimes they'll leave a little hole and your CSF will start to come draining out, which means your brain kind of sinks because the CSF is draining and your brain kind of sinks in the skull. And that'll give you what's called a spinal headache. So they'll have to patch that hole, usually using your own blood. They take your blood, inject it back into that area, and it'll clot and seal the hole, and your CSF will replenish itself. Anyway, a little off topic, but I usually get asked that in class when I'm talking about the spinal cord and the cauda equina and lumbar punctures. So I thought I would mention that to you as well. A little homeostatic imbalance, the spinal headache. So the spinal cord is going to sit inside that vertebral foramen. So if you remember, this is a vertebra here. You've got that vertebral foramen, and your spinal cord is sitting inside of that vertebral foramen. And you can see it's surrounded by those meninges. You have the pia mater that's just on top of the spinal cord, the arachnoid or spider web-looking layer, and then the dura mater. So these are your meninges that are separating the spinal cord from the bone of the vertebra. Coming off of the spinal cord, you have your spinal nerves. And so these would be your spinal nerves, and they come out in two roots, and we're going to talk about that in just a few minutes. This would be a spinal nerve coming off to either side. So your spinal cord, I think this is always surprising too, your spinal cord is more dorsal than some people realize. Remember, the body of the vertebra faces toward the front, your anterior side. This is your spinous or dorsal process off the vertebra. So your spinal cord is a little more outside the body than a lot of people realize. It's just inside of this spinous process. Not as protected as maybe you thought it was. So when you're looking at the spinal cord, here's a cross-section of the spinal cord, and it's made up of gray matter and white matter. And if you remember, the gray matter is where there's no myelin, and the white matter, you have myelin. So this is opposite of the brain, where the white matter was on the inside and the gray matter was on the outside. The spinal cord is opposite of that. Again, you have spinal nerves coming off. You have the dorsal root and the ventral root. They come together and form the spinal nerves. You can always tell the dorsal from the ventral side because of this little round thing called a dorsal root ganglion. That's always on the dorsal side. So when you're looking at the spinal cord, if you're trying to figure out the dorsal from ventral side, find this little bulge, this dorsal root ganglia, and this will tell you this is the posterior or dorsal horns, and these are the ventral or anterior horns of the spinal cord of the gray matter. Again, the white matter, this is the myelinated axons that form the nerve tracts. So nerve tracts are going up and down the spinal cord, taking information to and from the brain. The gray matter is that butterfly-shaped collection of neuron cell bodies. There's no myelin there. And if you were to look in your textbook, you'll see that shape, that butterfly shape, actually changes depending on where you are in the spinal cord. So it doesn't always look like a butterfly. If you want to look at your textbook and see how it changes shapes as it moves from cervical down to the lumbar region, you can see that shape is a little different. The dorsal horn of the gray matter is mostly your interneuron cell body. So this is where some integrative type cells. So information comes in, it goes to those interneurons, and the decision is made if we need to send it to the brain, or maybe it's a reflex. So you got interneurons there. And then your ventral horn is your motor side. So the dorsal horn is where information is coming in. The ventral side is information going back out. So remember, the nerves are not found in the spinal cord. In the spinal cord, you have tracts. And so you have ascending tracts and descending tracts. So the ascending tracts are your sensory or afferent. They're taking information from your sensory, like your hand, maybe a touch receptor on your foot, muscle spindles, taking information and carrying it up to the brain. So this one, you're seeing all the sensory information comes to the dorsal side of the spinal nerve, through that dorsal root ganglion, into the interneuron, and then up to the brain. Okay, so the same thing with the foot, into the dorsal side, into the interneuron of the gray matter, up to the brain. And when if you go into neurology, you'll learn some of these tracts, and they're always named based on the direction. So ascending tracts are named from bottom to top, so like spinocerebellar. So that would be one of the tracts. The descending tracts are your efferent or motor tracts. This is taking the response back from the brain out to the effector, the muscle or gland. So this one, the information is coming down. Remember, it's going to have to cross over, go out the ventral side to the muscle, causing it to contract. Here's another one coming down, crossing over, going out the ventral side to the muscle, causing it to contract. These are named in the opposite direction, so this will be corticospinal. So there's a bunch of different tracts. I'm just giving you an example of how they look and what they do. So ascending tracts take information from the body to the brain. Descending tracts take information from the brain to the body via the spinal cord. All right, that's all I'm going to talk about. It's a short video. We'll catch you later when we talk about the different types of things going on in the peripheral nervous system.